All right, I see that the recording is starting. So again, appreciate everybody showing up on today's call. For those that have been to previous KNOW sessions, I'm sure Maury and I are no strangers. We presented information before on fraud. I've presented to several times, both in person. So Maury, is our Vice President of Enterprise Sales for Transaction Network Services in the communications area, and I have global product strategy responsibilities. For those that are new, you'll get to know us, and for those that have been around for a while, you'll know that Maury and I will kind of go back and forth on this particular topic. So what are we gonna discuss? We actually did a research study that we'll talk about, but it's really about kind of the risks of spam fraud. Where how do enterprises today feel about it? What does it look like? What are their concerns? And again, why the voice channel matters. We'll get into that a little bit, and then really briefly touch on some of the solutions that are out there. And as Sarah mentioned, we'll try to hold the Q&A till the end. So with that, I'll kind of jump in, and then I'll hand it over to Maury to add color commentary. But we worked with a company called i360, and again, where we worked with i60 and we contacted contact decision makers and asked them about emerging business threats, such as AI deepfakes, resources, and how much budget did they dedicate to fraud prevention, and what they think that impact is on the brand and their particular bottom line, as well as any available call authentication and branding calling technologies that would help protect the voice channel. And obviously, you can see that we tried to talk to people that were at the manager level and above, that were of significant size, and had a decent amount of outbound calling. Obviously, some of the banks that Sarah mentioned, kind of in the intro, are going to clearly make probably 10x, 100x of those of that calling volume. Maury, I'm not sure if you want to add anything here, but
no. And I think as you move to the next slide, Jim, what we really want this overview, this opportunity to talk today to kind of encompass is we recognize this risk. It's an evolving risk, and it's a risk that, as you can see here, certainly is a financial impact. It doesn't stop there. You get into situations where you now have an impact on your brand. People make videos about you, and I might allude to that a little bit more, is anytime you want to sometimes see in today's day what's happening in the market, you have whatever application you might use. If it's Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, you just have to sit there and Google or search for spoofed calls, and you will see the evolving threat. The evolving threat is very creative, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. It becomes a bigger problem when agents are also then affected, because they don't know potentially on an inbound direction if who they're talking to is who they say they are. That's probably the greater precipice of our problem, is whoever it is on the other end, who we think they are. And then with that, you will probably see loyalty lost in certain brands that don't address the problem. So yes, it's a financial issue, but as we all know in our business, you've got to look a little bit wider to see if brand dilution becomes an issue, and the issues that then stem from that. So Jim and I want to kind of give some insight. We have witnessed through conversations, through being a provider, how the impact is felt. And I think it's, at least from my vantage point, something I can share with you in conversations that I don't have to go back much more than a few weeks, tell you about what the reaction is in the market, and hopefully through all of us in the CFCA community start to really understand the scope of the problem. Because it will accelerate, and it's going to have a noticeable impact to end consumers who then lose trust in the voice channel. Jim?
Yeah, and the one point that I did want to call out on the highlight on the bottom is, and I think we've become a little bit numb to this, is 10 billion in fraud according to the FTC. I think that number is probably off by about 10x. And it's becoming much more of a problem as we talk to enterprises and carriers and consumers outside the United States. So it is a global problem. Unfortunately, it's just not just the U.S., but it is a really global problem. And again, I think we start 10 billion just kind of rolls off the tongue, but when you think about how big that number is, that's fairly significant, and it's probably just again a tip of the iceberg. So some businesses, as Maury mentioned before, really unaware that they become victims of call number spoofing, until bad things happen. Even the largest brands aren't immune to impersonation scams. There was more recently a Chase Bank customer lost over $120,000 last year after a bad actor spoofed their customer service number. And clearly, like companies like Amazon have also been frequent targets of imposter scams. Again, bad actors will pose as a sales representative, trick the victims into granting remote access to their accounts under the guise of processing refunds, or that there's a problem with the account, and it certainly happens in two-factor authentication as well. I know, Maury, I know you have some information on that. But that access really allows them to then maybe to steal their credit card numbers, other personal information, and that's going to be shared across the dark web.
And Jim, I was going to mention that evolving threat that we talked a little bit about the last time, when we recognize what a DDoS attack looks like. You walk in that day for work and your routers are all at 99%. You wonder why you can't get online. It's immediate. You recognize that, yes, ransomware is maybe a building threat where they have accumulated information, but when they notify you, it's a bad situation. One of the things, just like your credit score getting compromised because someone's quietly taking loans out on your behalf and obviously not paying them, your phone number score is really no different. And if your numbers, which they are, occupied by an impersonator for outbound calling purposes, and in doing so, the call patterns trigger algorithms to negatively score that number, think about the effect that when you look to use that number legitimately, or something of a nature where that call needs to be made, you could then be flagged for spam because of previous users' behavior that could also coincide with them impersonating you. So your numbers are your identity, much like your credit score, and we all do quite a bit to protect that, but we have to also ask ourselves, why aren't we protecting our numbers? And there is some approach to organizing that data. Many customers don't know which ones are being used in certain circumstances. Through the data organization, you can then do better to address which ones need to be protected and utilize technologies from which to do so. So when numbers go out, you want to know which ones are being sent to your customers, and know that in effect those numbers are protected through technologies offered by suppliers such as TNS.
Yeah, thanks, Maury. So, who's most at risk? We kind of talked about that a little bit. 68% of contact center professionals have had issues with spoofing. Not really that surprising that would be over 2/3. And then nearly 8 in 10 have said that between half a million and 1 million of their outbound calls per month have had issues with spoofing of their business identity. And when you think about it, large volume contact centers that are making millions of calls a month, not hard for a bad actor to slip in 1,000, 10,000 calls that from those same numbers. Geez, it doesn't really look that different maybe from an analytics perspective when you look at when you look at the velocity, but when you start looking at the crowdsourced feedback, that the bad actor is trying to do that. So again, the bad actors are getting really good, and again, enterprises that rely on high touch communication, like the voice channel, and we'll get into it near the end where how important the voice channel is. You're just going to be kind of putting yourself at the risk of fraud and spoofing, impacting your brand, kind of all the things that Maury talked about a couple slides ago.
And Jim, it gets to, you guys got to realize that the path of least resistance is where the threat is most likely felt. And if the data networks are fortifying, and we're not saying they're not, they have absolute technologies in place over the better part of 10 years to really harden their networks. Has that same effort been done on the voice channel? No. And they have recognized that in order to get to customers going through the LAN environment, going through that interface, if you will, that's firewalled or has appliances there to protect them, it's cumbersome. It's not saying that they still can't get in there, but for their efforts, why not just call the customers directly? And in doing so, the creativity on the next slide is something Jim and I both have kind of got some examples, and one that I'd share with you, I thought was pretty, it's unfortunate to say it's creative. If somebody were to reach out to you and you answer, they may alert to you that they're with your bank or something of that nature. And in order to, what they claim, stop the fraud that they're witnessing on your account, they're going to go ahead and send you a code, of which you'll then repeat the code to them to know that they could actually know it's you. Now, I've had this happen, and obviously I was fortunately dealing with my actual bank, but I thought the creative spin on it was this. If an impersonator is going to access your account and can do so in an SSO, single sign-on capability that they figured out, the one thing they're missing is a code that is part of 2FA. So all he needs to do is get a hold of you, get to the signature, get to the 2FA request page, and at the moment he says, hey, I'm going to send you a code, I'm with your bank, I just need you to read it to me, he sends the code from the signature sign-on, the actual login page, and you read him back the code that then gives him the secondary access to get into your account, of which he's then going to go ahead and just transfer the money now that he's in your account. So again, all of this different avenues of defrauding you are present, and we witnessed even last month a spoof attack that for 64% of the calls, it wasn't the bank. And think about the volume of these attacks generated in ways that are done so probably by outbound dialers, that the accessibility to the population isn't too difficult. And then ultimately, if those calls are made, yes, they're going to at some point maybe clue in that it's not the bank. But what if it becomes, as we'll go to another slide here, a little bit more of an AI topic around somebody and a voice you recognize it isn't actually that person? Jim, do you have anything else on this?
Yeah, so if you were in the previous KNOW sessions, we brought this phishing scheme example up. Maury talks about how the bad actors are getting much more creative, getting much more multimodal, and again, we're continuing to see that. So, I'll send you a text, that says I'm going to be calling you from a number that you may recognize. When you receive the call, you would say, okay, it must be the bank, but unfortunately, it wasn't really the bank. And again, 69% of the survey respondents that we talked to, were very concerned about fraudsters using their business identity. And it can lead to tens of millions of dollars of customers being defrauded and their number being spoofed and potentially being their brand being impacted.
And Jim, it's still real quick. It's still something where we don't know what they might want to monetize. It might be your health information. It might be whatever they can get the creative back end solution that they're trying to solve once they get your information. So yes, a financial transaction is easy. Just transfer the money. But there will be evolving threats that take into consideration probably scenarios we've yet to consider. And for certain verticals, however they perceive you and the way they can exploit you, they're the aggressor, they're on the offensive, and we need to get quickly on the defensive as an industry to protect the voice channel. Everyone's going to just get more and more apprehensive about answering a phone call, and that disconnect compromises commercial business.
Yeah, and if you've seen previous decks from us, again, that 69% number, about 2/3, it's the same on how many people answer a call. It's like 8 in 10 don't answer a call from an unknown number. I mean, if I were to take a poll on today's call, how many people actually pick up when they don't recognize the number that they call from?
And Jim, so, as we add name to more numbers, if the secondary solution at times isn't the authentication of that call or spoof protection of it, they just need to get a hold of the number and they will get the name associated. And at that point, they conduct anything from an AI experience to an omni-channel experience. So yes, we wanted to get name, certainly out there so that more name recognition can create better answer rates. But unfortunately, there is an element that could accelerate a certain spoofing capability if you don't layer the protective measures. And so we know that the deep fake is out there and it's going to get more rampant. It's going to be used in different ways we've yet to consider. And so again, it's just more areas where the technologies need to be utilized to protect commercial business.
Yeah, so you can see here on the slide, almost 9 out of 10 of the managers of a contact center, are concerned about deep fake and AI spam and fraud. Again, it's both an inbound and an outbound issue, but from an outbound issue, I'm sure you may have heard our chief data officer says, hey, it only takes 3 seconds of your voice to be able to make a pretty good
vocabulary, yeah,
clone of your voice. And when you think about it, Maury mentioned it before, how many people do TikTok videos or have YouTube videos or etc. From the social media, or even within your own voicemail, right? Not even if you don't pick up from that unknown number, I can clone your voice pretty easily from the the voicemail greeting that you leave on your particular phone. So again, it takes like 3 seconds, and the technology is really cheap and very good. We've seen in the past CFCA event in Washington, others talk about how good this technology is and how easy it is to even do it from a video perspective. So again, this just becomes just another vector that the bad actors can use. So if we jump to the next slide, then on around concerns around call spoofing, again, 69%, 88%. I think we've already kind of talked about that, been impacted by spoofing. But what's interesting is, and we'll show it on the next slide, is while the concern with spam and fraud is high, for example, only 31% say their company isn't using a tool to prevent spoofing today. So it's kind of shocking, and I think we'll talk about that in the next slide and a little bit more about how there's kind of a conundrum or a dichotomy of, well, I see that it's a big concern, but we haven't spent any funds on it, or we're not looking at any technology. So Maury, let me just jump to that slide and
Sure.
Let you kind of cover some of the numbers, and I can jump in where needed.
Certainly. As we look to the outbound calling channel, the outbound calling on direction of traffic, so this would be originations from the enterprise themselves going to the end customer on a mobile device. This in and of itself is where communications need to be protected. We are also going to kind of allude to the inbound direction originating from the mobile device. back into enterprises. But the net of it is these are call originations and terminations that take place from the actual mobile handset. We know that it's recognized that the enterprises themselves that make these calls and obviously then also receive them, that there is an accountability to this process. That 100% when you have a conversation with them, of which we've had many, it's a recognized issue. Now, I will tell you guys, and you can all probably attest to this, this is a new spend. I mean, I think that even on the data side, there had to be incorporations of a new spend when accelerating beyond just a firewall. There had to be intelligence that went into it, sometimes behavioral analytics to associate users to their typical patterns of data traffic. And this is really no different. These threats are invoking a requirement of enterprises to expand their reach and protecting their business. And yes, that comes with an associated cost. It is a cost, though, that the value returned is much greater than the losses incurred. So we want to have a solution-based conversation to recognize the threat, address the actual outcomes they need to protect, and then build solutions around that. So contact centers are where a lot of those calls centralize. And in those architectures, that's where we can identify by connecting the traffic coming out to protect. And then, of course, in the terminations, we can correlate the origination A side to the termination B side, and in doing so, protect that path. So I think this slide, I don't want to say speaks to the obvious, but it's critical that we understand that, yes, these threats are real. This is where the operators and everybody knows the problem lies. We have an issue. We now need to understand why 12% of the companies surveyed are currently using caller ID tools to prevent it or some other technology to stop it. And so we know the numbers are low in adoption. The threat is high and the realization and understanding is high. We need to increase dialogue and solutions that help address the threat and find paths to adoption, because it's not going anywhere. And Jim, I think that as we look to this, without certain adoption, businesses and the exploitive nature of what's going to take place could severely impact their ability to do business.
Yeah, and what's interesting again is again the numbers I'd just say on the left hand side, 8, 9 out of 10 see that there's a problem, but as you can see on the right hand side, yeah, but we either A, don't have budget or aren't aware of the technologies out there that can help prevent it. And so again, I think this is a little bit good to share with that data. And as you mentioned, with the bad actors and what vectors are they going to take, right? So if I'm bank number one and I have all the tools, I'm one of the I'm one of the 12% that's adopted these particular tools. Bad actors are just going to move on to, okay, well, these guys have protected their network.
Yeah, exactly.
They've locked the voice channel down, and
they'll drop down to tier 2, tier 3 banks. And if hypothetically we're talking financial institutions, it is the whack-a-mole will push it down in a way that the threats to those regional banks and their preparation, maybe they haven't thought of what tier 1s would do, but it doesn't take long before the exploitation just riddles their customers with phone calls, and that reputation itself is highly detrimental because those banks may not have the resources to sustain such an event.
Right. And so I'm glad you brought up the whole whack-a-mole concept. I mean, it definitely is. The bad actors are just gonna go to the path of least resistance, right? And so Maury, why don't you talk a little bit about the voice channel.
Yeah,
It,
and
you know, it,
this is
it's interesting.
guaranteed.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jim.
I know that there's, that that there's a hesitancy to engage in the voice channel, especially, you know, especially when it's particularly harmful to the business and high touch industries that we mention here. But again, Maury, why don't the voice channel does matter, and it's not going to go away.
And we know that there are scenarios where you've got to get on the phone and finally get the issue resolved. I think certain omni-channel technologies, if it's an over-the-top WhatsApp, or if it's an SMS channel, or any of the different variabilities that we can use from a channelized standpoint, it all is superseded if we can just talk to somebody and overcome an issue. And at the end of the day, protecting that channel is surprisingly difficult if the technology of the impersonators and the fraudsters exceeds what we're capable of defending. So this slide is a reiteration that we have to take a critical prioritization of the focus that the voice channel and the business that it brings all enterprises in a connection to the end customer. And we want that connection to be maintained. We want relationships to continue to evolve through a conversation. It would be a little tough for Jim and I just to text you guys everything we're trying to convey. We still have to talk to you. And that credibility, that authenticity can only come through in a voice conversation. So we want the preservation of this channel to be first and foremost in any business. It is going to take an investment. It requires a technology, but once deployed, you sleep a little better knowing that you've made it a little harder for somebody to impersonate you. Jim?
Yeah, no, I think you kind of nailed it there. Let me go into, a couple of the solutions, and then, we'll try to end with enough time for, questions at the end. But, when you think about it, how much is voice calling really changed on your smartphone devices that you're paying, $1,000 for? Really not a lot. And so, with branded calling, you can have, rich call content on the screen. We've seen, better engagements happen. Whether it's a longer call, improved answer rates, or, an improvement in, some other ROI that they're looking at. So, this is just, kind of one example. And, Maury, I know you talk to, lots of customers that are, looking to get into, so how do I do this?
Mm-hmm. And it's something where, yes, we want the call enrichment experience that's detailed here, followed up by conversations of what happens when these calls are received. And so it's a two-pronged approach, but getting the call enrichment established through name, logo, and as you can see here, we also have intent detailed. That's an important consideration as it rolls out in all likelihood later this year. We're actually able to get a notification. And with these calls, in some cases, by adding that logo, it does become authenticated. And that's the authentication is that critical piece to connect the A and B side. So authentication of potentially one day all calls could be a direction we're headed. But in the event you add logo, you start to move in that direction. And then as needed, you can get to full spoof protection, and potentially, if you desire, we can block the call. So when you really recognize the goal to be create a fully trusted conversation path for customers that you've coveted, it took these companies a long time to acquire these customers. They're not interested in losing them. So getting to some level of these protective measures is an important conversation, Jim. And I think it's something the industry needs to have at least one that dictates where they want to land.
Right. No, 100%. And stir shaken was supposed to be the silver bullet that kind of helped with that. And, unfortunately it fell a little short. We do see calls that, are A-level attested that really shouldn't be. And, there's plenty if you go back to, kind of US telecom or, anywhere else, and, take a look at the calls. I mean, even the Biden deep fake calls all had a level attestation when, don't come out and vote, for the New Hampshire primary. So it does help with the tracebacks when the bad actors are good. It doesn't help, necessarily from being able to display rich content like, the call reason that you talked about or the logo that you talked about. We want to make sure that it's from, the enterprise. And so, the solutions that we've looked at, ensure that, is it really from, that particular enterprise, and not relying solely just on stir shaking where there can be some issues. So, Maury, I don't know if you wanted to talk about, telephone number you kind of touched
I alluded
a little
to
bit about it, so how do you know what your reputation is with the analytics providers?
Yeah. And we have tools because at the end of the day, as you know, we are an advice of risk provider. And through the advice of risk, which is effectively the designation of, say, spam on your call, if the call score is low enough, we want to bring to light and we want everybody to understand, even down to the customer level, that their phone number has a score. And this is applicable across really any provider doing advice of risk. If that number has a score, then ultimately it's going to dictate what appears on the screen. Now, if the score is lower, that's when spam is invoked on the display. It's not always the case that the customer call pattern dictated that. And this is kind of where I want to say that someone else could have used that number, and they do tumble through numbers. The outbound calling impersonators will roll numbers. And hypothetically, if they rolled through your number block and for the most part created call patterns that pushed all of those negative, you may have no idea. And when you go to legitimately call your customer, the call doesn't go through. And this happens where if they've trashed your number bad enough, let's say they rolled through your credit and bought 30 houses, I will be willing to bet no one's giving you a loan if you already own 30 houses. You just don't know it. And you didn't make any payments on it either. And if your phone number has been trashed to potentially a negative score, publishers such as TNS and the likes of anyone doing the service may not even ring the phone. So the effect of this problem could very well be an experience that you don't even contact the person you're trying to call because it got intercepted by the publishers or the protective measures taken by wireless carriers to get the scoring. So it needs to be something that you have to know your phone number scores if you're going to effectively call your customers. And telephone number reputation monitoring is a tool, for example, that we have that I could tell you the score on any number because for the most part, we've got all the domestic numbers scored. And when you're made aware of certain scoring, you can take steps to remediate it as needed. You can, of course, if you're negative, find ways to get to positive. One of those steps might need to still be protecting someone else from coming along and taking your number. And in doing so, making calls impersonating you. So, Jim, it's kind of a way that there are tools out there that, yes, can correct the problem, but it's also very important that the enterprises are aware of what their phone number scoring is on critical numbers making calls to customers.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Maury, for wrapping that up. I think we've kind of reached the Q&A stage. Did want to leave, time, for any questions that may have arisen. So Sarah, I think you can ask questions in the chat, correct?